we've got a little poll for you. We haven't done anything to waken you all up since you had your very nice sandwiches and hot sausages and so on. They were great. They brought some into us. So if you'd like to go onto your Slido thingamajig, we have a little poll there asking, has your association adopted any of the following technologies to improve tenant engagement? And we've got IDEA, stroke collaboration web portal, there's online surveys, mobile or web app, social media, none of the above. So if you'd like to fill that in for us and send it back, and we'll bring you the results whenever we've finished this session, so you need to get your fingers to do the walking. Gosh, do you remember that? That was a long time ago, wasn't it? Was that Yellow Pages? Let your fingers do the walking. I think you have to be a certain age to remember. Let's find out about nudging. I don't know how familiar you are with nudge technologies. There's the poll thing. Oh, social media, you're doing pretty well on that, or maybe that's one person. None of it, no, not so good. Okay, we'll keep that going, but in the background, while we hear about social media, and John Moore is going to talk, sorry, not social media, John Moore is going to talk about supporting your tenants through nudge methodologies, which sadly are not on the poll, but there you go.
Good afternoon. I just nudged my computer to record me to prove to my daughter that I'm not on holiday in Northern Ireland, because that's what she thought when I left the house this morning. So, I'm from, my name is John Moore, I'm from Dunleary, a little beautiful coastal town in South Dublin. Worked in advertising design for the last 20 years or so. And as a designer, nudge is one of the tools I use. It's one of many tools, but it's something that I've been using more and more over the last few years. Just a tiny bit of background about myself. I work with the local enterprise office, which supports startup businesses in Dunleary, but also the Institute of Designers, which is the largest cross-design discipline organisation on the island of Ireland, and that would include architects, interior designers, graphic designers, and so on. And I'm also chair of the Dunleary Town Business Improvement District, which represents 800 businesses or so in the town. So. Background on nudge. Okay, so pretty much how we make decisions as human beings. We've kind of two ways we work. One is an automatic reaction. So when somebody throws something at you and you catch it, that's your automatic reaction decision making kicking in. But if you're buying a house, for instance, you would do a lot more deep thought and thinking about it, and you'd mull things over and weigh things up. So that's more of a reflective decision making. So I suppose the issue with these two systems is they're both competing for your thoughts and your decisions. So, for instance, when you buy a burger and a drink in McDonald's or wherever, it's a bad decision, but you do it. All the logic says this is a bad thing to do, but your automatic just takes over and goes in and does it. So we all make these bad and irrational decisions all the time. And I suppose you can root them in there's a number of biases that cause between those two systems that there's a conflict. So the first idea is around anchoring. So if anyone on the anchoring is, let me say, I said to you, I bought a used car or I bought a house yesterday. The house cost me £100,000. Then I straight away asked you a question, which was, what would you say is the average price of a used house in Northern Ireland? If I asked that exact same question to the second group of people, but started that line with, I paid £200,000 for a used house, they'll give me a totally different result in terms of, so that's that. The idea is that the first piece of information you give somebody will automatically start to affect their answers to your questions. So the next icon there is the airplane, and the idea is that availability for information is a huge issue when you're communicating with people. So for instance, we all know that the statistic is that planes crash very, very little. However, a lot of people are afraid of flying. So it doesn't make any rational sense, but because certain events in the news and so on have a lot more prominence. The third area is rolling the dice. So some people, hope there's no gamblers in the room, but when people are gambling, they feel like they're on a lucky streak or a winning streak, and every time they roll the dice and they win, they feel the next time they have a better chance of winning. But actually, statistically, no difference. But this is down to the idea of people think they can they can keep doing the same thing over and over again, and it can be successful. The fourth one there is the icon which represents a magazine or a book. Is, if anyone remembers the Reader's Digest, people would have a subscription to Reader's Digest, or maybe like Netflix now forever, and you would forget to cancel your subscription, and so piles and piles of magazines or whatever, and you'd still be paying every month. So this idea of we have this bias towards the status quo in what we do, we don't change things even if they're not necessarily good for us or good decisions. And then finally, the other thing that's probably, for me, is one of the most important is the idea of the herd mentality. So people make decisions based on what other people do, and they follow. So, you know, they can be good decisions, but they can also be bad decisions. But bearing that in mind, bearing all those decisions, all those biases that help people make decisions, if you understand those, it can help you to communicate a little bit better and help kind of push people gently and nudge them towards making a slightly better decision. So choice architecture, this is the idea that when we put decisions in front of people, everything else I just said previously will affect those decisions. But if we give people the right choices, we can tweak it in such a way that we can steer them towards the right choice. So for instance, if you're shopping on Amazon or ASOS and something is highlighted as being the most popular item that is being bought, instinctively you're geared towards whether it is the most popular or not is irrelevant. People will tend to buy that or click on that more. How this evolves in the real world sometimes is this is the notion of the idea of the big bin, little bin. In how tenants were given 2 bins, the recycling bin was bigger than the rubbish bin, the general rubbish bin, which was smaller, and people instinctively recycled more because the recycling bin was actually bigger. Doesn't make sense, but it actually works. Organ donation is another example. So when there's an option to opt in to donate an organ, about 30% of the population will opt in. However, when the reverse is, and the status quo is that you're automatically opted in, only 10 to 15% of people will actually opt out. So again, it doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense where our decisions, you know, our decision to donate an organ should be a decision. So, and then you might all remember, you were talking about an ad earlier there, the 9 out of 10 cats prefer whiskers. This is famous from an ad, but actually this is showing us what the social norm is. So whenever there's a famous one for this where there's a sign over a sink in an office that says 9 out of 10 people put their dishes in the dishwasher after they've had their lunch, and actually psychologically it works because you don't want to be the person that doesn't do that, and we want to be part of the herd. In terms of there was a piece of research done around housing associations, and it came up with a stat that 91% of people in housing associations have to manage behavioural change campaigns at some stage, and those campaigns could be about money management or they could be about saving energy, where you have campaigns like that, you're trying to communicate, you can use some of these theories. So for instance, Obama's had a nudge team famously, and they showed tenants the energy bills of their neighbours, and as a result, their energy use decreased because nobody wanted to not fit in with their neighbours and not be doing what everybody else did. So just a couple of things around the communication. Repetition, it really works. You can't communicate too much and can't say the same message over and over again. They reckon 7 to 9 times before a message starts to really stick in somebody's brain. So make it really, really easy, and that's one of the kind of keystones of nudges and really good design, to be honest. It's just that everything is really easy to use. So you can communicate with tenants and nudge them in the right direction, but if the system, the service, or the platform, or wherever they're using is not really slick, it doesn't really work. So take out any barriers along the way. If you do want behaviours to change or tenants to do something, just try and remove as much barriers. And then I suppose just in terms of the actual content of communication, keep it, clarify exactly what you want. There's nothing worse than reading a letter and by the end you go, I don't really know what they wanted there. And what's even worse probably is actually when there's text and copy that's not clear and simple to read. And keep reminding people, as I said, repetition is important. And finally, if there's any way to reward, and that can be a simple thank you as a reward, but always reward somebody when they communicate back with you. This is my little slide I made up, which is the idea that people are walking around with their heads in their phones all day long and bumping into each other and walking out in front of roads. But actually, it's not all that bad, because I suppose what some of this technology does is lets us communicate a lot easier. So, for instance, in Dundee Town, we've introduced a pilot scheme where we've an app for all the businesses and residents associations on the town. And it's one picture. If you see a problem in the town, if you see an issue with the street or vandalism or anything else, you take your photograph, and that's automatically sent into the council, where they will go through all the issues in the town one by one. And that works really simply. You don't have to be particularly technology literate. A lot of the older retailers in town are not technology literate, but it just means one click, one photo, everyone knows how to do that. So it's using the simplest technology you can to do what you want to do. And finally, just if you are designing any services, do worry about how they look, but more importantly, just really think about how they look, but how they work. So it's, they have to be seamless, and they have to have no barriers to getting the job done. So thank you.
Thanks very much, John. And I think we should all wave to your daughter. He's here, really? Thank you very much. Now let's just look finally at managing reputations in a world of social media. It's a minefield, folks, isn't it? As we all know. And Brendan Scott is going to take us through that from MW Advocates. Hi, Brendan. He stepped in at the last minute, so thank you very much.
I saw everybody at lunchtime checking the list for car white on later on, saying I can't wait to hear that, and then I turn up and it's really, And this screen reel, I don't know about how many people are up here. It's like 24 up here. This thing's counting down to the end of the show, and you were someone's going to burst through the window here. Social media is a massive tool now, and even just getting up here today, I see how many people are retweeting this room. I know people in this room, and I know them from Twitter, maybe more than I know them personally. But it's become an absolutely key communication tool for us all. And the importance of communication as a human connection is very much connected to social media. It's in many ways, it's become disconnected for some people, but it should always sort of remain as an essential part of it, even as brands or as associations. And like all good presentations, a few good quotes would say what I'm going to say look better than I will, or a nice start. Successful communication in the 21st century is really changed. Most of this room probably grew up reading newspapers and having that as your main focus of news. But in the past few weeks or months, many people in the room have actually gone out and bought a newspaper and read it cover to cover. Not many, one or two hands kind of. But we get our news in a very different way, and we consume it in a different way as well, in that what we pick up isn't necessarily the way we used to, and reading to the very end of the story. Headlines are important, images are even more important now, and social media is really bringing that into the fore here. Social media, I'm going to race through these because I can't remember what presentation I've got here, which version of it, but it's the representation we have at the end are probably more important than what's sort of said in these slides. They're more of a guide to me. But social media and what it is and how we engage with the audience is where you guys want to come from. You guys, as public-facing bodies, as public-facing organisations, need to manage your brand very well, and it can be ruined very quickly, even though it takes a long time to build up. And getting back from that is a very tricky thing. And I'm not going to dwell too much on the positive stuff that you do with social media, because I follow a lot of your organisations, and you're good at that. You're good at saying what you do, and you're good about using things like photos and videos and that. But it's when it goes wrong is when it really happens. And in media today, the impact of social media and journalists and how they use it is probably where we as a communications firm come in. Because journalists are all on Twitter. They all follow Twitter, not just to get their own stories out, but to pick up stories. And that's where often, possibly late at night, an incident happens, an adverse sort of situation somewhere, someone walking by tweets about it, the citizen journalism kicks in, and all of a sudden that story is railroaded into a very big deal. and you can be very quickly fighting back to try and get to a good situation. It's not always factually correct, and that's a huge problem, and I'm sure you guys have probably seen it where someone says something on Twitter or Facebook which isn't true or is not totally true, but immediately the story runs off, and you have to sort of pedal back on it, which is why the importance of interaction and personalization of your own social media will be key for your organization. Social media numbers are really important. They look huge, but the number, I would say, of watchers in social media, as opposed to actual interactors, is important. My dad, his technology advancement has stopped at CDs. He can't get much beyond that. But he tells me things that happen on Twitter, and he's not on Twitter, but he's clearly watching these things. He clearly picks up stories. He picks up what he sees as the first read is the fact. It's not always, but it's the first thing you see. Twitter and Facebook have done all the analytics on your time spans, and for videos in particular, it's said that 6 seconds is all you've got. If you don't get someone in the first 6 seconds, it disappears. And anyone who's ever done a Facebook campaign, they give you the drop-offs of people, and you'll see that the first maybe 80 or 90% in the first 10, 15 seconds. By 30 seconds into a video, it's dropped. By a minute into it, you're down to 15 or 20%. People aren't finishing it, so your message has to be to the fore very, very quickly. Now, I've got the presentation. This is an example of your reputation going from very, very high to very, very low in absolutely no time at all. And you sure all remember last year in United Airlines America, there was an incident where a guy was taken off it. And this is sort of a quick report of it. I don't know if there's any sound in this. It's probably better there's not, because it's basically this poor man screaming. And you'll see from the video, this is obviously taken on board, and you'll see as it pulls out, everybody has their phones out. Everybody was videoing this, and immediately putting it on to Twitter and Facebook. And within minutes, within hours, it became a huge story, and United Airlines had to go into absolute overdrive to try and repair their reputation, and did it very badly. In the first instance, they drag a man off a plane, and they're absolutely not sorry at all. They sort of basically made it out that they had done the right thing. But the Facebook and Twitter reaction to it, and the news that came from it, all using a video on a phone, shows just how quickly your reputation can go from very good to absolute zero. This is the citizen journalism that we sort of mentioned earlier on. Everybody with a phone and a Twitter account, doesn't have to be verified, doesn't even have to be the real name, can get a message out there very, very quickly, and it's very, very hard to deal with. United took a huge hit in this. Their share prices, went down. I would say that in the past 12 months or however long it is since it, that the numbers of people traveling with them in America has probably had a massive impact as well. I'm just going to skip on to the very end here. So the changing views of how we consume things and how we view things via Twitter or on Facebook are very important. 67% of people have watched videos from brands or businesses. So while a lot of people sort of think Twitter and Facebook is very much, it's just me and my own account, brands and businesses have, possibly later on have come onto it and realised that they can tell their story and react to their story very, very well. Out of it, search engine hits to brands, their Twitter or Facebook stories and links into it, and it's often first thing for it, and that's for negative as well. If you've got a bad story or you've got a reputation to manage, Twitter and Facebook are important for that as well, with properly refined messages. The last point there, most social media is a medium for people to complain about services. That's an absolute regular now. TransLink have a good social media account and they respond well, but anybody who follows it, day and daily, it's where the hell's my bus? It's 10 minutes late, it's 15 minutes late. And how they respond to it, as an example, and a lot of other organizations do this as well, they very much personalize their account. They have a sign off from a certain person, and when it's not a difficult story, they're able to be liked and engage with people. And a lot of the time they try and move people offline, have the discussion, which is grand for most people, but it won't always work, and sometimes you'll get into battles. And that's where your reputation manager really comes in. No one wants to get into a slagging match on Twitter. It's not 3 o'clock in the morning and you haven't had a glass of wine. You just can't do that in this game. So the things to remember, it's a very, very public forum. Anyone can see what goes up there. So you can't sort of have different conversations with people. British Airways infamously had an incident where they had a massive flight delay and people were tweeting at them sort of saying, well, what's going on here? You need it. And they were just saying, well, check the website. And then Davina McCall, who was on the flight, she tweeted, what's going on here? And they says, oh, Davina, DM your number and we'll contact you. And everyone clearly went at them then because they've been treated differently from a celebrity. Brief engagement is better than ignoring people. A lot of the time you'll see the comment or and your instinct is to either go full gun blazing at them or just say nothing. And sometimes it's somewhere in the middle. People, oddly, they come to expect a service out of Twitter. They always demand a response from you, even though it's not really how the medium does work. But that's how it's come for a lot of brands. So saying something back to them, at least sort of beginning to explain the conversation, can go a long way. But being personal doesn't mean being glib. People, this is their natural reaction now. Email for many has become a secondary thing, and as I said earlier, newspapers and that are long gone for them. The biggest thing about I would say is fixing a problem can help resolve a complaint. That's simple. Maybe not easier said than done, but that's a good way of doing it. Two very quick ones is that timer sort of gets closer and closer to zero. This is getting Twitter massively wrong. And it's clearly when it's not managed properly by yourself. This is a footballer who just copied and pasted what his agent sent them and made an absolute idiot of herself. And when it starts, can you tweet something like that? And last, my final slide, at least don't get too angry with me now, it just hit zero. KFC had a big problem last year and they ran out of chicken. So it's sort of very important for an organisation who just sells chicken. And they came back within a few days with a genuinely fantastic response to what the problem was. And I don't know if this has won awards. I'd be very surprised if it hasn't. But this is, I don't know whether you can see it from back there. It's one of the best responses I've seen to a very, very, very difficult situation that the organisation found themselves in. And so it's sometimes it's being smart with your response. The mea culpa will hold their hands up, but you can have fun with it as well. Thank you very much.
I hadn't seen that, but it's terrific actually, isn't it? Really clever. Communications, they're kind of vital, and I'm delighted to say they also pay my mortgage pretty much still. There are quite a few questions coming in. One of them specifically is for you, actually, Helen. And it's saying, what were the respective lessons from the 3 types of digital initiatives by our colleagues in England?
Yeah, great question. I think this on. Yeah,
Yes, on.
I think.
Hold it up nice and close.
Yeah, the second example I gave where a housing association put a initiative on and nobody came to it. I think the key learning from that was, and that one of the other housing associations did really well, is that you have to take things to people. You're in a really unique situation where actually you can engage with people within their homes, and you need to recognise the barriers that some people may not want to leave their homes and come to you at a community area. So I think that was a real key one. And as well, and it's kind of been brought up in some of the other talks today, that in order to solve these huge societal problems, it's probably best to work in partnership with other people. You can't do everything yourself, so I think that's a key one too.
That's good, and I see Janet nodding sagely at that too, and it's kind of not reinventing the wheel to a degree, isn't it?
No, it's just common sense, I think, really. And it applies to so many problems. The idea of working in partnership is clearly preferable, I think, to working in splendid isolation. So, agree.
Absolutely. The other question, or it's not so much a question, it's a point, but maybe someone would like to take it up, and it says, communication via texting and emails is good, but if tenants don't provide updated numbers and email addresses, then it's pointless, and that is a challenge. I mean, you've got to be getting it right, haven't you? It needs to be a two-way street, I suppose.
Yeah, can I just say that I think that's exactly what the quote that you didn't see was trying to say, that just because you have communicated doesn't necessarily mean that your message has been received, and that's a practical reason why that might not be the case.
So is that something then that housing associations need to make sure that they keep their databases up to date?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a key one around keeping the databases up to date, but also trying to create that two-way engagement with people. You'll always have somebody's contact details if you're speaking to them and they're speaking back to you. So the idea of letters, maybe falling on the letters step and not getting looked at, actually give your tenants a reason to speak to you about different things.
And I mean, I'm just thinking too about GDPR. I mean, gosh, I've nearly forgotten about it. I don't know about the rest of you. It was such a big thing at the beginning of the year, and here we are in October, and it's like it never happened. But I mean, presumably you all had to do huge amounts to make sure that you were storing and handling and having the right to the data and all that kind of stuff. So if you did that, then maybe you have got your tenants' details right, because you might have had to check them all with them in the first place. Would that be a possibility? I'm just wittering here, I have no idea.
Yeah, I think with that one, there's those different conditions of GDPR, but if you have a contractual need to be in contact with somebody, you didn't have to send that really pleading email, oh, why are you leaving us, kind of thing. So they wouldn't have necessarily had to have done that, but for maybe tenants that had signed up to get marketing updates, they would have had to, yeah.
I thought it was interesting what you were saying, John, about repetition. And I'm not sure whether it was you or Brendan who said that no one wants to get into a slanging match on Twitter. But actually, Trump, I don't really need to say any more than that, do I? You know, he says the same thing all the time and gets into slanging matches on Twitter all the time, and his people seem to absolutely love it. Yeah, grab a microphone there and have a chat.
I don't really want to talk about Donald Trump too much, but repetition is good because it does get your message across. But just to be consistent about the message you get across, Trump is a good example of keeping it really simple, maybe too simple, but that's a good example. He's very, very clear on what he's saying at every point. It's very, very simple language he uses and so on, and it does work because it gets its message across.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the simple language makes me think back up to the kind of bad old days when I was a print journalist at a time when newspapers were still selling large numbers, which, alas, for my colleagues, they no longer are, as you said. But we used to have a kind of rule that you did something in what we call Daily Mirror speak, like nothing in more than 3 syllables, because nobody can be bothered going there. And I do still think that that's not wrong.
And Twitter, to a great extent, has help people get back to that. The initial 140 characters and then 280 characters is people had to learn to say stuff very, very succinctly. Maybe not great for people who are fans of good grammar and good English, but it's one of those things, like in communications, if you're explaining, you're losing a lot of the time. You have to keep going over and getting into the detail of things. People want a short, sharp answer now, and so that's part of, not to praise Donald Trump, but that's part of his appeal to his base, is that they know what he's talking about. They know what his message is very clearly. We might not like it, but that's who he's talking to.
Yeah. And some of you I know weren't here this morning, but we had a great example of it, hadn't we? With the translate into English, that bizarre stuff about universal credit. So my brain glazed over on about the third line, but it was a really good example. Have we any more questions from the floor before I let our wonderful panel go here? Well, if we haven't, I'm going to say thank you very much indeed to Brendan, John, Janet and Helen. I'm going to get them to stay. I'm just getting them to stay there in the hope that it'll keep you staying there for a tick as well. When I remind you for one last time about the bus tonight, if you're going to get it, remember, tell the registration desk. Also, tonight, the drinks reception's at 7 o'clock, sponsored by MW Advocate. Brendan will get up and take a bow. And dinner, sponsored by the Ulster Bank, will start at 7:45. So you haven't time for a round of golf, and it's getting dark outside anyway. So in that case, you may go to a breakout session. And Sue's going to pop up where they all are. Just by the way, too, since we were talking about social media, NIFHA 18, which is where we are, is trending second in Belfast at the moment on Twitter. So keep tweeting. Well done, everybody. Excellent. So these are our 4 breakout sessions. Supporting vulnerable people, that's in here. Tenant engagement to the left of reception. Sector leadership in here, and development challenges in the Earl's room to the right of reception. Enjoy your breakouts. Have a super evening, and I'll see you in the morning. That's what you just said. Thanks very much indeed.
Stop drinking anymore. I know, exactly. I'm back across the lake.